Hello, and welcome to Hot Cocoa Episode 15, Editing Binary Data. Now, I know that sounds like an incredibly geeky topic, and that's because it is. But it's a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. And that's because when I first started programming, when I was like 11 or 12, which is a long time ago, I started programming because I wanted to edit ROMs, like game ROMs. The kind of ROMs you use to play SNES and Game Boy games on your computer. And by editing those ROMs, you can essentially recreate a new game from the shell of an old game. You can edit levels or give yourself infinite lives or any crazy cool stuff like that. We won't be doing anything quite so complex in this episode, but the principle is essentially the same. So here's what we are going to do. I have here on the desktop a plain text file called plain text, obviously enough. In that plain text file, we have some text, which says this is a plain text file. I want it to not say this is a plain text file. And there are simpler ways of going about this, short of editing the hex code for it, but we're going to take the complicated route to prove a point that we can. So anyway, we're going to change it to say this is a plain good text file, because it is indeed a good text file. So let's see what that text file looks like in hex code. So I'll open up Hex Fiend here, and then open up our plain text file, and there we go. So this is the ASCII hex code for our file. Each one of these hex numbers in hexadecimal corresponds to one of the letters in the file. Now we can see we want to edit this first text here, which originally is 74, 65, 78, 74, and we want to change that to say good. So let's first see what we need to change it to. So we'll type in good. And first, let me turn on overwrite mode, because we're going to be overwriting it. So we type in good there, and you can see our hex code is now changed to 676F6F64. So that is what we're going to be changing our file to using our programming in Xcode. So let's start a new program. And this will just be a regular program here. And let's call it Hex Editor. A very, very simple hex editor that only does one thing. But it does that one thing really well. So let's begin by editing our header here and creating the outlets that we need for the interface. We'll only need two of them. One is a text field that is the file path. So as text field. And the other one is simply a button, which is going to be the patch button. And we also need a single IB action, which is going to patch it. So we'll call that patch file. Oops, there we go. And there we go. Now let's create our interface really quickly, which shouldn't take too long because it only has two things on it. So let's get our text field out here. Drop that onto there. Expand it out. And let's drop a button on there. And there we go. All right, we'll change this to a patch. And we're done with the interface. Well, not quite. We have to link stuff. But we are essentially done with the interface. So let's link up our outlets here. Is this saved? It appears to be saved. Get back. Don't you just hate it when like the windows get all behind and weird? Come on. That's our app delegate, yes. Why aren't you letting me link these? There are more outlets than just that one. Oh. Here's the problem. The asterisk was in the wrong place. Simple little thing causes major frustration. Alright, let's try this again. Hey, it works. Alright, so we'll link that up. And we'll link this back. There we go. Alright, now everything's linked. We can save that and close that. Now, for actual code, let's just copy and paste this here. Save us some typing. Alright, now let's begin to write the code. The very first thing we're going to do is when they click on the button, we want to disable the button because we don't want them clicking it in the 2 milliseconds that it takes to patch this. Because you never know, some people are really good at clicking things. So I'm going to set the patch button enabled to no. Now, essentially what we're doing is we're inserting data into the file, or more correctly, we're overwriting data in the file. This data is a series of hexadecimal codes. Now we're going to store this in a character array, which if you're familiar with C, you'll know what this is. Because we're not storing it yet in an Objective-C object. This is just plain C. So we'll set a constant, and we'll make a character array called code, and it's going to have 4 characters in it, which is going to be the hex code for G, O, O, and D. So we're going to set that equal to bracket for the constant character array here. And the first one, if you'll notice here, is 6, 7. So we're going to write that in Xcode as 0x, which tells it it's hex code and not decimal, or hexadecimal and not decimal. 6, 7. The next one is 6f. So again, 0x, 6f, 0x, 6f, and finally 0x, 6, 4. And there is our array of characters in hexadecimal. Then the next thing we need to do is to tell it where in the file we want to overwrite. This is the position. If you look down here at the bottom of our hexfiend window, it says it's at offset 16. Now, this particular program gives the offset in decimal. I'm not quite sure why. I was looking for a way to change it. But some programs give it in hexadecimal, which in this case, 16 would be 10 in hexadecimal. But since it's giving it in decimal, we might as well give it to Xcode in decimal. It should also be noted that the first position in the file is not 1. You'll notice here it's 0. So it starts out on 0 and then goes 1, 2, 3, 4. In either decimal or hexadecimal, however you prefer to see it. But in this case, it's giving us decimal. So we want to create a long, which is essentially a particular type of integer. And we'll call it position, and we'll set that equal to 16. Now you'll notice it doesn't have a 0x in front of it because we're giving it to it in decimal. If we wanted to give it to it in hex code, we'd write 0x 10 or 10 because that's equal to 16 in decimal. So we'll just leave that at 16. Now the next thing we need to do is create a file handle to handle the file for us, and so we can do stuff to it. And in order to do that, we want to create a new ns file handle, and we'll just call it file. Simple enough. And we will get that by calling ns file handle file handle for updating at path. That tells it we want to open this file and we want to update it, and this is the path of the file that we want to open and update. And we're going to get that simply by getting the string value from file path. Like so. Close that off. Add our semicolon. Now the next thing we need to do is take our character array here and put that into an NSData object, because the file handle methods we're going to be using to insert that data into the file want that data as an NSData object for practical and probably obvious reasons. So let's create a new NSData object here, and we'll just call it data, and we'll go NSData data with bytes. So as you can see here, we have constant here, which is going to be our bytes, and then an integer, which tells it how many bytes there are. So we're just going to set that to code, which is what we're inserting, and the length will be, we'll get it using the size of function here. So size of code. And then we'll close that off. Now we actually finally get to actually write the data to the file. And to do that, we're going to be using the file handles methods for file. The first thing we need to do is to move our imaginary write head to the place in the file that we want to write to. You can think of it as sort of like a virtual hard drive, if you will, with a little write head that you can move anywhere you want in the file, and you can tell it to write stuff or delete stuff or overwrite stuff. In this case, we're going to be overwriting things. But first, we need to actually move it to the position that it's going to start writing at. And to do that, we use the seek to file offset function. And we're going to seek to the position we created earlier. And then we're going to write to it. And simply enough, we're going to use the write data method here. And we'll call that data. Or we'll give it our data that we just stuck into a nice NSData object. And then finally, we're done with the file. So we want to close that file. And then after that, we'll let them patch other stuff. So we'll set patch button, set enabled to yes. And that is essentially it. It's an incredibly simple thing to do that you can do incredibly powerful things with if you ever need to edit binary data from a file of any sort. So to recap, we created a character array with our 4 bytes here that represent the letters G, O, O, D in ASCII. We set our position where we want to write to here in decimal in this case. We created a file handle to open our file, an NSData object to hold the character array that has our text hex code in it, and then we went to that position, wrote the data, and then closed the file. So let's see if this works. Nope. Oh, forgot a semicolon. There we go. Little things can mess you up. All right, there's our program. Let's drop our plain text file into it. Hit patch. Everything seems to have worked correctly. Let's close out here. Don't save it. Close this. Reopen our text file. And there we go. We now have a plain, good text file. So that's it for this episode of Hot Cocoa. I will see you next week.